again. I've had a number of people ask me recently, including donors, how Saorsa is coming along. So let's cover that this week for the Q&A. First off, very well. There's been some big leaps and bounds recently, especially in the background lore and appearance of the various species. In particular, I have been studying a lot of stuff about psychology and mythology in particular. So, wait, what does that have to do with Saorsa? Well, here's the thing. Saorsa is a tale of the individual's rise to greatness, as well as their rise within the group. Even though you will be playing the individual, there's a lot of tropes and archetypical concepts which are part of forming this path to be walked. The idea of how a character goes from being like your stereotypical farm kid to taking on literal gods is something that has been explored for thousands of years. From the earliest of religions to mythological tales of fantasy, we see these things playing out repeatedly over and over. Now, due to the fact that Saorsa is a role-playing game, and a fairly open one at that, with a world specifically designed to only provide a framework so that the GM can deal with it as they please, working concepts such as the hero's journey into the underlying base game, both in the fluff such as the lore and the mechanics so that the players are directly rewarded for their accomplishments towards these goals, is a pretty tricky thing to do. To accomplish this, I've been listening through dozens of hours of university lectures upon these concepts, and reading up on the classic epics and so on, because these were pretty heavily distilled versions of the overarching concepts. What I've been doing is breaking them down even further, parsing this vast amount of information, and building it into the very core of the game for, well, a few weeks straight now. I was going to just finish writing up the version 0.2 first alpha version of the game, but, well, I realized that if I did that, I might be stuck with some parts that I can't really get rid of easily, which may fundamentally break the game later on. So I've had to go back to theoretical modeling to prepare for the larger changes which are going to occur. It's a bit more effort now, but it'll save headaches in the long run. Now, you've seen the tip of this iceberg already. The history of Saorsa series began a few months ago, yet it underwent some dramatic changes through the course of such. You wouldn't have seen these changes if I hadn't spoken with you specifically about where it had started from, nor seen my notes. But there's been some really big shifts in how things have worked over the past 2 months or so. One of these, for example, is the concept of the omni-war in the heavens amongst all the different deities. The basic concept had always been present from pretty close to the start of Saorsa's construction, though recently I've been reading up upon how religions absorb one another historically. In particular, how a deity from one religion will end up taking on the aspects of other deities from previous religions, which have had their populations conquered. Mesopotamia, in particular, has been a very interesting example of this to look into, where you can clearly see a snowballing effect of gods going to war with previous gods and gaining their domains and traits over hundreds of years, eventually coming to form the god Marduk as a particular example of this. The previous gods sometimes are killed outright and removed as part of the story. Others become part of a pantheon with a diverse array of deities from all over the region, eventually coming to rest under a single religion. You can see this happen with early Judaism as well, how several deities got clumped together or removed, merged, and so on. The early assimilation of El and Asherah, for example, giving rise to Jehovah as their child, and then the subsequent diminishment and removal of the parents entirely to replace such with an always present infinite version of the god, which had no origin but always was. So what does this have to do with the Omni-War within Saorsa then? Well, one of the key things that Saorsa is about is that of personal choice, that there is no true morality that universally applies, and in particular, that the individual's values are important to the individual, the very framework and foundation of character design. Within Saorsa revolves around this as a concept. The concept of a war amongst the heavens is one wherein each deity possesses various traits or properties and acts as a representation of values. When these deities go to war, what is essentially happening is those values and morals come into conflict, and the winner of such is the one which is held in highest regard by the people as a whole who worship them. It's not the gods themselves that are dying, well, sort of, but rather what the gods represent, their values, their morality, and their culture, which are being assimilated and reformed hierarchically into new pantheons to represent the new order of values, morality, and culture. You may recall, if you listened to the video on the Omni-War previously, that there was no winner in the war as such. There were a lot of losers, and some few who barely escaped with their lives, but no clear winner as such. In fact, after the conclusion of the war, what arose was a highly neutral form of value set in place. Or, more specifically, it wasn't really values as such, but rather a set of logically derived ethics enforced by the neutral Assyrians. Which leads us into another part of the changes which have been undertaken with the lore of Saorsa. The Assyrians have always had an angelic visual representation thing going on. Now, though, there have been some minor but important changes to such. In particular, is the removal of the face entirely. This has been done for a few different reasons, which would take quite a while to get into, but some of the key ones are to remove their ability to be easily identified with, and to make them seem far more neutral and alien. They don't overtly show emotion, and in particular, it gives them both a feeling of being very homogenized and lacking of individuality, despite preaching specifically about individuality. There's some other stuff which gets pretty deep into psychological stuff about averaged facial features, how people react to certain stimuli, and works into some of the specific characters within the game setting and how they react to them. That's another thing as well. I believe I've mentioned this before, but I'm not sure if I ever really made a video about it. And I'm not going to go back and check because it'd take forever. Basically, there will be a character which embodies each of the different playable species worked into the game's manual. These characters will be able to provide a rough sense of what a semi-typical individual of those species is like, their opinions on various concepts, and so on. These will show up as little aside comments with the character's facial expression, maybe their upper body and such, where they can express thoughts and describe the concepts on the page, such as game mechanics being explained in the character's own words as an example showcase, or just what they think about the setting. Now, part of this is that each of these characters will also embody different archetypes within the game's definition thereof, namely individuals who value different concepts predominantly over others, but they'll also each provide different archetypes in the sense of their role within classical literature and epic tales, standing out for what they do within the context of a story. I've been working through making sure I build these characters as good examples of all of these things, so that they'll be able to help walk the players through the game's manual, as well as the setting itself. I need to make sure that these characters are very well defined before I do the next stage of writing up the book. Again, since they'll be integral to how it's presented, so that's taking a fair bit of time to get each of them fleshed out fully as well, so that they feel different from one another. Different speech patterns take a while to get done properly so that you can tell exactly which character said something without even so much as seeing a name or other indication beyond what is said. You need to be able to just look at the text and go, oh, I know who said that. Anyway, another thing is the artwork. Again, I've almost got it ready to ship off to the artist. I know, I've been procrastinating badly on it. I wind up working intensely on other stuff I need to do instead of that when I get the chance to work on the artwork. So yeah, I mean, it's still productive and all, but I really need to get this last little bit done because it's nearly ready. But anyway, there have been some changes to how some mechanics work, such as illusionary magic, specifically fleshing out exactly how the Nagetsun's illusions work, more tweaks to experience, the life path system, and a minor tweak to combo abilities, where they gain a stacking bonus to hit, which I'm not sure if I really want to keep as is. I'm thinking about adjusting it to a skill rank bonus, but I don't want to minimize the effectiveness of counterattacks and such. It's a neat idea, but how it's implemented will drastically alter gameplay, so I want to be careful with the change, even though it's a fairly tiny tweak on paper and won't make up more than a paragraph or two in the written book. It's amazing how such a small change can undo the balance of a whole game. But that's what happens when you mess with core rules. Even my not really directly work stuff, well, my time off, I mean, I do rest occasionally, if not very often, but yeah, that stuff is also being utilized towards working on Saorsa in a way as well. In particular, I started pulling apart the guts of Diablo 2 as a modding experiment to see how it works internally. The structure and organization of the rules and various aspects of mechanical effects. It's given me a lot of time to consider how certain economies work in the process of fixing the problem of gold being worthless in the default game. And I've been testing some of the specific concepts I have in mind for Saorsa through such. I've also been doing some early experimentation between growth curves, linear increases, and diminishing returns utilizing simplified formulas which can be implemented with text alone, as Saorsa won't have the ability to make use of the computational prowess of a computer, sadly. Basically, even in my spare time, I'm still thinking about ways to better improve Saorsa along the way. But yeah, lots of good stuff still being done. The game's still coming along fine. I've got a few more skills worked out and such. Different concepts are now far closer to a finalized state and so on. So anyway, with that, I think I'm out for now. So I'll see you next time.